Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPhone 5S and see how this particular phone holds up in 2024. Now, I will definitely tell you the iPhone 5S was a pretty interesting phone when it first came out, but I probably wouldn't recommend the average person to go ahead and buy and use this phone anymore. There are much better phones out there that the average person should go ahead and buy. So I will leave those phones linked down in the description so you can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPhone 5S, the thing with this particular phone is that for the most part, this was a very interesting device that Apple made. This was one of the last 4-inch iPhones that Apple made as well, so keep that in mind. It did come out in 2013, and this was also one of the first times that Apple basically made a smaller phone and not a smaller phone and a bigger phone, but they made a more expensive phone and a cheaper phone with the iPhone 5S and the iPhone 5C. So that was something that was very interesting that, Apple ended up doing in this particular case. Now, on the front of this particular phone, you are getting that 4-inch IPS LCD panel, and it's not actually that terrible of a panel. I've always felt like this panel and this screen, for the most part, was actually pretty good. Of course, Samsung and all these other manufacturers have made way better panels than this thing since then, but it was still a very, very nice, cool thing that Apple ended up doing on this particular phone, which is actually pretty good. This was also the first iPhone to bring Touch ID. So Touch ID is basically that little fingerprint sensor on the front, which essentially allows you to go ahead and basically unlock your phone by just going through and holding it down on the fingerprint sensor. That was something that was very cool and a very, very nice touch that Apple ended up throwing in here. And I actually like that a lot. Having that type of capability of basically going through and just unlocking your phone with the fingerprint sensor was genuinely very awesome, and it made a little bit more sense of having a fingerprint sensor on your device. So that was something that was very cool. You're still getting a lot of bezel around it comparatively to how big this phone is, but it's still like a nice looking phone for the most part. Still something that looks very good on this device. On the bottom, you're getting a lightning port, which is genuinely very cool, and you're getting that headphone jack as well. And I will tell you, still having the headphone jack in the phone is still really nice. And I will still say lightning is still fairly good for the most part. Like, having a lightning port is very good, and as long as you are okay with having a phone like this, then it's totally okay. I will tell you there's phones out there that have USB-C now, which are much better, but still lightning is totally okay. On the back side, you're getting this aluminum back, so aluminum back in the center, and you're getting these 2 glass shards at the top and bottom of your device. So again, this is something that's very cool because you can just go ahead and basically just have a little bit of like a newer feeling phone and an older feeling phone in one. The fact that it's not all glass and not all aluminum is actually kind of unique and interesting. I actually do like this phone a lot from that perspective, from that specific perspective. Single camera setup on the top as well, and that kind of covers it up on the outside. I mean, there's not really a whole lot of other crazy things going on here. The big thing though to keep in mind here is that with this device, you are basically missing out on a lot of key features and a lot of key areas that a lot of phones have nowadays. Now, what does this mean? So things like wireless charging, you're not getting on this phone. Things like IP certification, you are not getting on this phone either. And you're not getting things like reverse wireless charging and like no triple camera setup. Like, so many things across the board are being limited on this device. And it would kind of suck if you were going through and actually buying this type of device, because I'm sure you don't want to go ahead and buy a phone like this that's so outdated it's not even funny. So that's kind of essentially what's going on here. You're basically buying a phone that is pretty much outdated for the most part, and I'd hate to go ahead and recommend a phone to people that's already going to be outdated. So that right there is kind of a big deal too. So keep it in mind. But I will tell you, on the exterior, the iPhone 5S still looks and feels like a pretty good phone, but you are definitely getting better phones out there if you just get a more expensive one for the most part, which kind of makes sense. So that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the camera setup, you are getting that single camera setup on the backside. It's an 8 megapixel sensor, and you're also getting a 1.2 megapixel camera on the front. Now, this type of camera, I would say for the most part, it's a fairly basic camera when it comes down to it. It's not anything crazy. It, is pretty much what you'd expect. It's not anything insane. I will tell you back, when this phone came out, it was actually pretty good. I'm sure a lot of people had a really good time with it, but as you may have expected right now, it's really not that great of a device. It is severely an outdated camera, and some things you are missing out on it. Like I mentioned before, you're not getting multiple camera setups on this thing. You're just getting a very, very limited version of a software on this thing in terms of the camera. You're missing out on things like portrait mode, cinematic mode, no 4K video. I mean, those are some pretty, no telephoto lens, no ultra wide sensor. Those are some pretty basic things that a lot of phones have nowadays that this device is not getting. So that right there can be a pretty big, reason why a lot of people would avoid buying this phone. And that would be a main reason why I would recommend people not to buy this phone either. There's no reason to have a phone like this at this day and age where there's so many better phones out there with such better cameras. So that right there is another big thing. Like, why would you even want to buy this phone for the most part? So that kind of covers it up from the camera side as well. In terms of the software longevity, this is another pretty interesting thing about this phone too, because on one hand, this phone has been outdated with software for a long period of time, but on the other side, this phone was also one of the longest lasting iPhones, Apple has ever made, which is another pretty insane thing for the most part. Because on one hand, the iPhone 5S was it didn't really get that long of a version of software. It was kind of outdated even when it first came out, but then it slowly got a couple of iOS updates. It ended off on iOS 12 so many years ago. So that's another main reason why I wouldn't recommend anyone to buy this phone, is because it is such an outdated device from that perspective. There isn't really a big reason to purchase a phone like the iPhone 5S because it's been outdated with software for so many years. But on the other hand, this iPhone is still kind of getting some iOS 12 security updates. I don't think it's gotten any this particular year, but throughout the last several years, this phone has been getting so many software updates it's not even funny. So it stopped in 2019 or 2018, but since then it's been getting more software updates than you'd ever imagine, which is so crazy. So because of that, it's kind of more of a complicated situation. I still would not recommend buying this phone, but the fact that it was, ended with software fairly early. The iPhone 6 also ended around the same time as this device, but then you have phones like the iPhone 5S that are still getting software support kind of on iOS 12. It's actually a pretty insane thing. So from that perspective, that kind of covers it up there. Now in terms of the chipset inside and the performance, you are getting that Apple A7 chip inside of it with 1GB of RAM. Now, I will tell you, from basically everything you could ever imagine on this type of device, it's a fairly limited performing phone now. I mean, it's not that great of a performing device. Realistically speaking, no matter what you're going to do with it, it's really not going to be giving you that great of an experience. It's not only a slow phone, but also the mechanism of messing around and using this phone is fairly slow because of that home button. You have to constantly click and use that home button no matter what you're going to be doing with this device. And that can be a very, very annoying thing. Having to constantly click the home button and then, wait for it to respond, especially on an older hardware like this, it can be very annoying. Even on phones like the iPhone SE 3rd generation that have the almost newest chipset on the A15 Bionic, that can also be a very, very weird experience for some people. So I will tell you, from that perspective, you are getting a way better phone in pretty much every single way on the newest ones than this one. So once again, keep that kind of in mind. But I will tell you from that perspective as well, you are getting overall a better phone in every single way on something like the current generation iPhones that are still supported rather than an iPhone like this. So to kind of sum it up, what I will definitely tell you is with something like the iPhone 5S, I genuinely don't think this device is worth buying anymore. I don't think this iPhone was worth buying even 2, 3, 4 years ago. And that's totally okay because a lot of phones nowadays are much cheaper and they don't even cost as much as this thing. I mean, it costs a little bit more than this thing, but they are much better deals than this particular device. So that is probably another thing to keep in mind there too. So I will tell you, no matter what, if you're planning on buying a device like this, you are much better off purchasing an iPhone, like an iPhone XR, XS Max, or 10s, the standard one. Those are much better iPhones to buy than this thing. So take it as you will, but that's kind of how I would kind of sum up this video, that this iPhone isn't really worth buying anymore. So that pretty much covers it up here. If you have any more thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.